The Matrix has barely started when a phone booth is demolished, left as a smashed pancake of glass and metal. It was a prophetic touch. Payphones were still everywhere in Western cities when the film came out in March 1999. By the time of the first sequel 4 years later, they were already half vanished, replaced by a private army of Nokias and Motorolas. But now The Matrix is a relic too, a quaint slice of 90s nostalgia about to celebrate its 20th anniversary. 1999, the recent song from Charlie XCX and Troye Sivan, features wistful lyrics, "Those days, it was so much better," and cover art in which the millennial pop stars wear the black leather costumes made famous by Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss as they battled the machines enslaving humanity. Yet for a relic, it never slipped far from view, still a familiar reference in a world divided between internet and IRL. In real life, its characters endlessly circulating in memes and GIFs, often as vehicles for the acrid politics that define our 21st century. Charlie XCX and Troye Sivan on the cover of 1999. Back in the 20th, much of the highest excitement was reserved for the visuals, the digital rain of green code, the bullets slowed to a stop while Reeves swayed around them. But the premise was what made it a phenomenon, the idea our whole reality might be a virtual concoction. How would we know? More ticklish still, would we want to? If, like Reeves's weary hacker Neo, we were approached by Lawrence Fishburne's Morpheus, would we take the blue pill to return us to life as it merely seemed to be? Or the red that promised us, however terrible, the real? Of course, Neo chose red, as we told ourselves we would, too. The notion of the Matrix hit a nerve. Despite sunlit economies and political stability, a strange ennui and mistrust of technology hung over the end of the 90s. People fretted about the millennium bug and reality TV. In fact, as sibling co-creators the Wachowskis alluded to on-screen, the film was just the latest in a long line of variations on a theme, nestled in the mainstream of philosophy. In the allegory of the cave, Plato presented humanity chained to a cave wall, taking passing shadows for reality. Then came the first meditation of Descartes, 1641, speculating that everything his senses told him might just be the work of an evil demon. By the 1980s, we had the theory of the brain in the vat, built on the impossibility of ever knowing for sure that you aren't exactly that, your whole life simply electrical impulses wired into your tank. For the philosophers of 1999, The Matrix meant boom time. High-profile essay collections found existentialists, nihilists, Christian theologians, Zen Buddhists and a dozen other schools of thought throwing metaphysical buns at each other over the meaning of the movie. For a time, the shriek and whir of your dial-up modem could take you, eventually, to the official Matrix website, where densely argued academic papers were hosted on the corporate dime of Warner Brothers. But the mind to which the Wachowskis paid their deepest tribute was unimpressed. During the film, Neo pulls from a shelf a hardbox, Simulacra and Simulation, by academic and provocateur Jean Baudrillard. While the pages were hollowed out to hold an illicit cache of computer disks, Reeves had been required by the Wachowskis to read the book to better acquaint himself with the film's most treasured influence. A postmodernist darling, Baudrillard put forth a slippery but naggingly brilliant idea, that reality itself had been replaced with endless reproductions of what simply felt like it. Jobs, novels, architecture, ideologies, wars, they were all just copies and copies of long-gone originals. Take The Matrix, living on in those GIFs, pop songs and this piece in The Guardian, but actually watched with vanishing rarity. 2. Red pill is now a verb, opening the eyes of far-right recruits to hated oppressors, feminists and people of color. Baudrillard called it the desert of the real. The Wachowskis had Morpheus intone the phrase from a Chesterfield armchair set in the smoking ruins of our former civilization. But the film only moved Baudrillard to protest that it was a misrepresentation. For him, hypercapitalism had destroyed the very idea of reality, whereas The Matrix had a whole new one ready to go as soon as Neo could overthrow the machines. The theory of the brain in a vat contained a fiendish double bluff from within your tank. You might even be prompted to wonder if you were just a floating brain. To Baudrillard, hypercapitalism was similarly deceptive, knowingly producing spectacles about the evil of the system. The kiss-off was inevitable. The Matrix, he said, is surely the kind of film about the Matrix that the Matrix would have been able to produce. He let slip that overtures had been made, but he had declined any involvement in the sequels. As salt in the wound, he also said he preferred David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. His decision-making proved sound. Two follow-ups, Reloaded and Revolutions, were released back-to-back in 2003. They were both bitter letdowns, cliched and confused. Somewhere there was what might have been a nod to Baudrillard's complaints, but the delivery was so hand-fisted, it barely registered. The Wachowskis never quite regained their luster. Letdown. The Matrix Reloaded. Photograph. Oh, Reuters, should it matter? In other ways you might almost call real-world, they said, an important example. At first glance, The Matrix shared some of Hollywood's worst habits. Among its influences was the Japanese anime Ghost in the Shell, an inspiration from another culture, refitted with a white hero. Yet Neo's enlightenment lay with people of color, not just Morpheus but the cryptic oracle played by Gloria Foster. And a subtle blurring of sexual signals put a twist in the on-screen relationship between Reeves and Moss, lovers and lookalikes in shades, and with neat androgynous haircuts. Issues of identity would prove life-changing for the Wachowskis themselves, the results as groundbreaking as anything in their films. In 2008, Lana Wachowski completed her gender transition, the first and only Hollywood director to do so until 8 years later, her sister Lily followed suit. To its creators, perhaps The Matrix was the patriarchy and the war it waged on the authentic self, and their resistance to it was their greatest achievement. But everyone has a Matrix, and that ended up as a problem. As early as 1999, Slavoj Žižek had noted a hitch with a utopian prospectus for life online. Instead of the internet bringing people together, he wrote, it would dissolve us into a multitude of small others, and tribal particular identifications. Later, in his regular takedowns of The Matrix, delivered with unfakeable contempt, Žižek came to the same conclusion about the Wachowskis' film. That, for him, was the secret of its success. Their original intentions hardly mattered, whether the Wachowskis meant their red pill to represent a gateway to Baudrillard or an escape from norms of gender identity. The easy-access metaphor made it universally seductive. Asked if they could imagine what it felt like to be a lonely rebel, oppressed by dark forces distorting reality, it turned out pretty much everyone did, from flat-earthers to neo-Nazis. As Žižek put it in the documentary The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, I want a third pill, explosive scenes, bullet dodging in The Matrix. Photographed, snap stills, Rex, Shuttershock. Baudrillard died in 2007, a year before the financial crash saw the wheels come off hypercapitalism. He may not have been surprised that, confronted by a genuine rip in the fabric of the system, the response among both public and politicians was a frantic attempt to go back to normal and never mention it again. Instead, a bogus new reality arose, the reanimated far right. With awful irony, the stunted boys of 4chan and Reddit appropriated The Matrix. 2. Red pill became a verb, opening the eyes of new recruits to their hated oppressors, feminists, people of color and progressives. Morpheus became the face of memes that ask, what if I told you Hitler was a socialist? And here we are now, in the Britain of 2019. It is, of course, pure Baudrillard, a country manically returning to an earlier version of itself that never existed. Our unreality is operating at a heightened pitch. Global leaders lie so openly as to mock the very notion of truth. We exist as plots of online data, the last real things in an internet otherwise home only to bots and deepfakes. There is even an updated model of the brain in the VAT simulated universe theory, in which you are, right now, part of a computer program. Elon Musk is a believer. Inevitably, as the 20th anniversary of the film has approached, plans have emerged for a Matrix reboot. reports have suggested that after last year's cancellation of their Netflix project Sense8, the Wachowskis may retire from filmmaking. But Warner Brothers, as the owners of the movie, did not seem to be involving them anyway. Instead, it was said, the studio would take their intellectual property and create an expanded multiverse of related characters and storylines. A whole set of new matrices, in other words, all accompanied by the ghost of Jean Baudrillard.